Today we're going to talk about the resolution system in Backpack and also a little bit about combat. As I talked about in the previous video, I am making a role-playing game, and I had a lot of goals that I wanted to realize with this rule set. And check the previous video if you want a refresher on that. I also talked somewhat about the different systems that were in the game. And the thing with systems are that they are interconnected. I was thinking a lot about where to start if I wanted to talk about the backpack system, but everything is kind of entangled. Everything is connected to everything. There is no perfect starting point. So I thought I'd start with the resolution mechanics and combat, because it's generally, since this is a fantasy game and generally that's a big central part of the games, right? So that's what we will do. All right, let's go here. So this is the character sheet in its current form. It's like version 2050. I redo them all the time, and it could seem like a lot, but really the lower 60% of this character sheet is basically just inventory. So the important stuff is at the top, and if I should really trim down the fat, this is really the backpack system, so to speak, or this is your character. And if I remove everything else, so your character in Backpack has 4 attributes, and sense is kind of like perception, alertness, intuition, awareness. Wit is your intellect and also your force of personality, quick thinking, stuff like that. Grace is your agility, dexterity, body coordination stuff. And might is like your physical strength and your endurance. So just so you have an idea. And you have pretty low stats, pretty low scores on these attributes. You start your character right now, you start your character with 12 points that you divide as you wish, but that will likely change. I've changed that like many times, and you can have a score lower than 2. And these 4 numbers is pretty much everything you need to check if you succeed or fail on anything. So if we're going to talk about the basic resolution mechanic, then you have something called a difficulty die, and that could be anything from any die really. And the bigger the die, the harder the check, the harder the test or the challenge. So what you do is you basically, the GM tells you, okay, give me a D8 wit check. Then you have to roll a D8, and you have to roll equal to or lower than your wit. So it's clearly a roll low, roll under system, where the attributes on the character almost never change or are never modified, and it is instead the die you roll that is changing, right? So this is basically the foundation of the system. So it's very, very simple. And then, of course, you could use maybe the best thing that came out of 5th edition, Dungeons and Dragons, was the advantage-disadvantage mechanic. And it has been replicated a million times in a lot of other products or indie role-playing games. And I have done that as well, because it is very good, and I didn't want any modifiers to test. So I call it Banes and Boons. So it's basically if you have a particularly favorable condition, you can get a boon on it, rolling 2 difficulty dice and picking the lowest one. And a Bane is the same, but you pick the highest one. So that's basically it. Let's talk about combat. So this is really where it all started, the idea that, if you recall, I wanted to make a system where the game master did not have to track anything at all. No hit points, no attack bonuses, no damage, no hit die, nothing like that. So what I use is something called an enemy dice, or several enemy dice. So an enemy die, it's basically the same thing as a difficulty die. It's handled the exact same way. The only thing is that each enemy or monster has a particular die that pretty much dictates how dangerous they are. If you'd like, you could think about it as the higher the level of the monster or the enemy, the bigger the die they are. And they actually is a die. When I represent the enemies on the board, say if we have a combat or something, then I actually put their dice in the die tray, and I say, this is the goblin, this is an orc with like a warhammer, and back here we have 3 archers. So they actually see a couple of different dice, and what it does is that without knowing specifics, the players can gauge a little bit of the challenge. They don't know exactly, because of course some monsters have hidden traits. I'll talk about that in next video. But they can get a pretty good idea. So, for instance, if they are very, very new characters, like they don't have a lot of good equipment or haven't had a lot of experience, and they should stumble into something that is much too difficult for them, it should be pretty obvious that this is maybe a fight we better retreat from. If you like put out a lot of big dice, that's the idea of it. So how do you actually fight? Let's start with the player character. We'll make an example. Melee hit is tied to your grace score. So when you roll to hit something, you want to roll equal to or lower than your grace. Your ranged hit is tied to sense. Say you want to hit a D6 monster, a goblin, let's say. Then you roll. You actually pick up the goblin, which is a die. You roll it, and if you roll equal to or lower than your melee hit value, then you hit it. Then you have succeeded. But combat in Backpack is resolved in 2 steps. First, you roll if you actually get a hit, and then you roll if you actually wounded. And that is called making a damage check. So let's say this player character has a spear. Then that weapon has a damage value attached to it. So this spear has a damage value of 4. Bigger weapons could have even more. So if you hit, when you've succeeded with your melee hit, then you take the same die, you roll again, and you roll what's called a damage check. Then you should roll equal to or lower than the value on your spear. If you succeed, then you have defeated that enemy die. So, but in many cases, most of the enemies will have at least 2 dice. So it's kind of like they can take 2 wounds. The number of dice is loosely tied to how big they are. So say like a human-sized person, about human-sized, would always be 2 dice. And the type of die would indicate how dangerous that enemy is. So so if you hit the goblin, then the first thing that would happen is that he would lose 1 of his dice. And if you maybe another character also hits them and damages them with another weapon, then that die would also be gone, and that would mean that the monster is defeated. So that's how the characters attack. Now, to defend against being attacked, because works similarly but in reverse, more or less. It's always the players who roll the dice in backpack, or almost always. So Dungeon Master don't do that. Dungeon Master pretty much just say, all right, the bugbear attacks you. Then the player with the character who's being attacked have to take the bugbear die and roll it, and they have to roll equal to or lower than their defense save. And defense save is also tied to your grace score. So your defense save would normally also be 3 in this case. So you would have to roll 3 or lower to avoid being hit, basically. Now, you could pump this up if you have a shield, for instance. Then you would increase your defense with 1. So this is the rare instances where there actually is a modifier on one of your attribute scores. But it's not something that changes for different checks. It is just something that changes depending on your equipment. If you succeed in your defense save, then everything is good. Then you manage to dodge or block the incoming attack. And even though an enemy has more than 1 die, when you try to defend against it, you always only roll 1 of them. So you only have to defend against 1 of the dice. If you fail, though, that means that the attack hits you. And this is where you have to check if you take any damage or not. To do that, you make a toughness save. And toughness save is tied to your might. But if you have an armor of some kind, you could pump that up a little bit as well. So this is basically where armor comes in. Armor will boost your toughness save. This bugbear who rolls d8s. When you make toughness saves, though, all of the monster's dice are rolled. So you have to save against each one of them. Here, larger monsters with a lot of dice, they could inflict a lot of damage in one hit. They are also more resilient and tough to kill. So that is why the number of dice indicates a larger creature. I will talk a lot more about when the player takes damage, the different damage types, but I will talk about that in the next video. Yeah, so you can see the goblin has 2 dice, but the bugbear has 3 because they are big. They're even bigger than a man. So they can hit really hard, and it takes some hits to defeat it. And the ogre might have 4 die. That's you don't want to be hit by that guy. This is pretty much basically the combat system. So it's very simple. It's a roll under. You always use the enemy's dice. So all the enemies are dice. And you also use that even in non-combat situations. Say you try to deceive someone when you're talking to them. Try to lie or something like that. Then you roll their difficulty die against your influence skill. Or if you try to sneak past the guard, then you roll the guard's die against your stealth skill. Everything is tied together in the same way. All right, thanks a lot, guys. Next time, I will try to give a more complex combat example. I will talk a little bit about the different damage types. I will talk about zones and movement. And I will also talk about enemy traits, because not all D8s are the same, right? Alright, thanks a lot guys, and see you later.